Hey everyone, I'm Jennifer Whitacre, and today I'm going to talk about boundaries part 2. And I'm going to start by talking about some pitfalls that block awareness and hinder our ability to set healthy boundaries. And then I'm going to shift at the end into some tips and techniques for setting healthy boundaries. And before I jump in and get started, please know that I create these videos in an attempt to put information out in the world that I wish I had known decades earlier in life. So if you find this information helpful, please like, subscribe, and share with somebody else who could benefit from it. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit the bell because each video and each topic builds upon the ones before it. So that way, if you hit the bell and subscribe, you won't miss anything. So let's jump in. Let's start out. I'm going to talk about 3 really important misconceptions and misconstrued ideas that need to be addressed before setting healthy boundaries because they can get in the way and setting boundaries can go sideways pretty quickly. And the first is the concept of comfortable versus healthy. And this concept is one that always seems to get in the way of setting healthy boundaries because people don't think about it. And when we don't think about it, things affect us in ways that we can't see. Humans tend to have this weird notion that what's best for us at any given moment is what makes us feel comfortable in that moment. And that's simply not true. Health and comfort are not interchangeable terms. In fact, one could argue the opposite and have a really valid point. Oftentimes, the healthiest choice is also the least comfortable choice. Spending a Netflix and chill weekend on the sofa, eating comfort foods with, a few glasses of wine and chips and M&Ms and other snacks might be a really comfortable choice, but it's certainly not the healthiest one. And likewise, taking the time to exercise, adhering to a healthy diet, and setting limits to maintain a consistent schedule and day-to-day routine for yourself can be inconvenient and uncomfortable, even though it might be the healthiest approach. So it's important to make a clear distinction between comfort and health, because what's healthy is usually not what's comfortable. And we have to build a tolerance for discomfort. And for some people out there, they'll need to start with practices to build that window of tolerance. And I discussed that window of tolerance last week in Boundaries Part 1. So we need that capacity to meet life's ups and downs without getting bumped out of our zone and going into a rage or being so numbed out that we can't function. And that takes us into the next concept, which is understanding discomfort versus threat. And in order to step into discomfort, we must be able to discern accurately between discomfort and threat. Doing the right thing, doing the healthy thing, or doing the thing that adheres to your personal core values will likely not feel comfortable, especially if everyone around you is choosing otherwise. And those around you might even be encouraging you or flat out peer pressuring you to go along. And in almost all situations, opting out is going to be uncomfortable, but it's not going to pose any real threat. However, those uncomfortable emotions and sensations that the body is experiencing can make it feel like a real threat. And this is where you need that ability to discern. Is there really a saber-toothed tiger in the room? As in, is my life really in danger? Am I really in danger of being harmed in some way? Or is it just really freaking scary to say no? So you have to have the capacity, you really must have the capacity to sit with your own discomfort while simultaneously realizing that discomfort is not a threat in order to set healthy boundaries for yourself. If you want to understand more about what causes us to perceive threat versus safety, go back and watch my video from several weeks ago when I discussed the SCARF model. And if you want to understand how the brain can hijack us into seeing a threat when one doesn't actually exist, watch the video on the hand model. And there are links below in the newsletter in the description, so you can circle back to those videos if you need to. And the third misconception, and this is super important, is that people with healthy boundaries are popular, wonderful, likable, charismatic people who have magnetic personalities. And in fact, the opposite is often true. You're more likely to see popular, charismatic, magnetic personalities emanating from the psychopaths and narcissists in the world than you are from a person who has healthy boundaries. Because those with the healthiest boundaries and the strongest sense of authenticity about them are often labeled as snooty or standoffish, unapproachable, distant, and outright rude sometimes, because they're not putting up with other people's nonsense. So if being rude is not putting up with other people's nonsense, then I'm guilty of being rude. To have healthy boundaries really does require a certain thickness to your skin, because you will be misconstrued, you will be misunderstood, and you're going to need to build the capacity to be okay with that. Having that internal locus of control that I discussed in the last video requires a commitment to oneself, a commitment to connecting with, knowing, understanding, and learning all the ways in which your unconscious mind communicates non-verbally, and then training the conscious mind that the verbal communication it's so familiar and proficient with is only a fraction of who you are. If you only know yourself based on the narratives in your mind, you only know a part of yourself, because the body holds a vast array of nonverbal memories, memories of lived experiences. And a practice of interoceptive awareness is what allows us to create a more comprehensive narrative about ourselves and our own lives. And that's because the narrative created by the conscious mind almost always shifts and changes once that narrative is filtered through the nonverbal experiences stored in our somatic memory. So I know I keep circling back to this over and over and over again, but it's so true, and I can't drive this nail home hard enough. Self-awareness is the key and the heart and soul to setting healthy boundaries. It can help to break down boundaries into a couple different categories so you're more aware of your own personal needs. And categories of boundaries can be internal and external. And I'm going to start with external boundaries today. External boundaries define and allow us to recognize where we stop and other people start. So some external boundaries include personal space boundaries. Don't stand in the personal space of another person without permission. And this is going to vary from person to person in your life. So your spouse or your partner, you might be out in public and stand very close to that person, maybe even overlapping, where your arms are touching or you're holding hands. And that can be perfectly fine, but you're probably not going to stand like that with your supervisor or your manager or one of your subordinates at work. So again, knowing and understanding your comfort level and personal space boundaries, and also respecting other people's personal space boundaries. Touching boundaries, very simple. Don't touch another person without consent. And I know the huggers of the world hate this. And also, so many of the huggers in the world lack appropriate boundaries. Having good and positive intentions does not grant permission to forego informed consent and just grab someone and give them a hug. That's a boundary violation. And it's very simple. Ask and be okay with a no. Be okay with a handshake or a wave if that's all the other person will allow. Personal belongings boundaries. Don't go through other people's stuff. It's really not cool, and it's not a good look to go through the medicine cabinet while at somebody's house when you're a guest. Don't leaf through your spouse's or your child's journal. That's where we process our emotions, and emotions can be irrational. And keep your fingers out of another person's purse. bag, cabinets, car console, or anything of a personal nature unless you have explicit permission to be in there. Don't expose other people to something harmful. So, for example, if you know you're sick and it's contagious, whenever possible, stay home and recuperate. Don't withhold that information. Let people know that you're ill. Give them the choice to be around you or not. And keep in mind that in extreme cases, exposing somebody without consent, when you knowingly have a contagious disease, has actually gone to court. And it's been in cases, like with somebody spreading HIV, and they've been charged with attempted murder for not telling the other person they had HIV. So it can, in some cases, become a lot more serious than just passing along the common cold from your household to the neighbor's household. Sexual boundaries. Don't engage in any sexual activity with another person without consent. And this should go without saying. Unfortunately, it's still a really major issue in society. Ongoing informed consent is important, and people have the right to change their minds. Consent once does not equate to consent forever. It means consent once. Now let's talk about internal boundaries. And these are the boundaries we set for ourselves. Internal boundaries determine how we choose to interact with ourselves, and they help us adhere to behaviors that keep us in integrity. And to be in integrity means our words and our behaviors are aligning with our core values and the people that we perceive ourselves to be on the inside. So, how you use your words is really important. Don't name call. Don't reinforce painful beliefs. Don't repeat something that isn't true. Don't yell or scream. Don't ridicule. Don't lie. Don't break a commitment. Don't manipulate or control someone else with coercion. Don't be sarcastic. Don't interrupt. Don't blame or shame other people. So some of these internal boundaries are the parameters that guide the words and behaviors that we have towards others with whom we're in relationship. Now, healthy boundaries are a way to get our needs met. Now, there are 3 really common and highly unsuccessful strategies for getting our needs met. And those unsuccessful strategies that I think we're all guilty of at some point are, number 1, trying to force, coerce, or manipulate the other person into changing in ways that we think they should be. Number 2, trying to change or mold ourselves into the person we think the other person wants us to be. So it's the opposite of number 1. Or number 3, which is just giving up. We stop seeking new relationships, we numb ourselves or dissociate so we can stay in a really uncomfortable and unhealthy toxic relationship, or we might even suppress our desire for love and connection altogether in order to brace ourselves for living life alone. So these strategies of trying to force the other person into changing, trying to force ourselves into changing, or just giving up in some capacity are common strategies, but they never seem to work. So how do you set healthy boundaries without falling into some of these pitfalls? Well, again, know thyself as much as possible and keep building that practice of self-knowledge. Have something that you do every day to know yourself. Healthy boundary setting includes knowing yourself enough to communicate clearly and with kindness to the other person that they've crossed one of your boundaries. Now, when I say with kindness, kindness is a complex emotion, and to be kind with somebody means that you can be both firm and gentle at the same time. You can experience anger and you can communicate that anger without the anger controlling your words and emotions. So you're speaking for your anger, not from your anger when you're communicating with kindness. Next, make a request for a different behavior. And if necessary, explain why the behavior was a boundary violation and why it's not okay to you. Now, the explanation is going to be situation dependent. So you got to know the other person well enough to know if the situation even warrants an explanation. And is there a consequence for the boundary violation? And whenever possible, let another person know in advance what the consequence will be so they can make an informed decision around their own words and actions. So maybe your partner has lied to you about something small, or maybe your partner has lied to you about something big. Each one is going to have a different consequence. Or maybe your teenage daughter was late for a curfew. What are the consequences for the different boundary violations? And whenever you present the consequences, always, always, always allow the other person to have a choice. Dictating behavior is not setting a boundary. It's dictating and trying to control that person. So if they choose to violate your boundary again, you now have more information about this person, about this relationship, and the more they violate the same boundary, you're going to start to see, do they really respect me, or is there a lack of respect? Like, what's going on in this relationship here, and how can we repair that rupture, depending on what the relationship is? So whatever you do, allow them to have a choice in their behavior, because taking away someone's choice never feels good. Next, whatever that consequence was, follow through with it. So let's say your daughter was late for curfew and the consequence was no driving the car for 2 full weeks. Not following through on that consequence is enabling the behavior of breaking curfew again in the future. And it's breaking any responsibility and accountability for her own behavior. So make sure you follow through with any consequences. Otherwise, they just become empty threats, and then you become the boy who cried wolf. Be liberal with praise when the person is operating within your boundaries instead of only speaking up when they violate one of your boundaries. Praise reinforces a desired behavior, and it doesn't take away the other person's choice or agency in any way, shape, or form. Plus, think about how good it feels to be recognized or thanked or appreciated, or someone says, wow, I'm so glad you did that, or I'm so glad you said that. I'm really grateful that, you stepped up and helped me with this, or whatever that is. Let them know. And that's going to reinforce those resourcing behaviors in any relationship. So I hope you found this information helpful. I know that this is complicated and convoluted, and in the best of circumstances, it's uncomfortable to set healthy boundaries. And what works in one situation might fall apart and go sideways in another. It's always a learning curve, and we're always going back and forth and getting better. So the more you can get comfortable with being uncomfortable, the better you're going to be at this work. And the more you know yourself intimately and that deep, unconscious, nonverbal aspect of yourself, the more you know that, the easier it's going to be to set boundaries. So if you found this information helpful, please like, subscribe, share, hit the bell, and share this with somebody who might find it valuable. All right, everyone, I will see you next time when I come back with one final part 3, talking about boundaries, where I give you some tips and techniques on boundary setting with challenging family dynamics around the holidays. I'll see you next time, everyone. Happy self-discovery.